I used to think Savannah's golden sunsets could make anything look honest. The way the light hit the river, how it glimmered across the moss-draped oaks. It always felt like a promise of calm, of truth. But that afternoon, as I stood by our kitchen counter surrounded by half-packed suitcases, I realized light can be deceiving too. My husband, Daniel, was sitting across from me, scrolling through his phone, pretending to confirm our flight details for our family trip to Turks and Caicos. He looked so casual, so composed. A man who had nothing to hide. I remember smiling, trying to match his calm, my heart fluttering with excitement at the thought of taking our first real vacation in years. I didn't know that the ticket confirmations he kept glancing at weren't for me or our daughter, Lily. Savannah summers are heavy. Not just with heat, but with a kind of softness that makes everything slower. That day, even time seemed to move differently. Daniel had been oddly quiet all week, saying work was hectic, that he'd booked the trip last minute as a surprise reset for us. I wanted to believe him. We'd had a rough year. His business investments had gone sour. He'd been distant, and I'd convinced myself this trip was his way of fixing things. Love makes you interpret silence as effort, distance as stress, and secrecy as protection. I didn't know better then. The first crack appeared that evening, while I was printing Lily's travel documents. Our family printer connected to his email by default, something I'd never even thought about. But that night, a subject line popped up mid-print. Final itinerary Daniel plus Emily. I froze. The page slid out half-finished, and there it was. 2 tickets. No mention of me. No mention of Lily. Just Daniel's name beside someone I'd never heard of. Emily Rhodes, the woman he'd claimed, was his financial advisor. I stood there, staring at the ink still drying, trying to make sense of it. My first instinct wasn't rage. It was confusion, the kind that makes your chest tighten, and your mind spins so fast, it can't settle on a single thought. I told myself maybe it was business. Maybe the airline had made a mistake. But deep down, something in me already knew. I think most women do. That quiet knowing before the truth fully arrives. The next morning, he kissed my forehead like nothing had happened. Said he'd head to the office to wrap things up. Before we left, I nodded, pretending to. I didn't confront him. Instead, I followed the quiet voice in my gut. When his car pulled out of the driveway, I checked our joint account, something I rarely did because Daniel managed the finances. That was my second shock. A transfer of $100,000, gone overnight, moved to a separate account under his name. The same day he booked the trip, I remember the way my hands shook as I sat there at our kitchen island, the Savannah light pouring through the window, catching every trembling movement. My entire world tilted in that moment, not because of the money, but because of what it represented. Every dinner he'd called too expensive. Every cancelled plan. Every time he'd told me to trust him with the bills. It wasn't protection. It was control. I didn't cry then. I just went still. You know that kind of silence when your body knows something your mind can't process yet. That's what it felt like. I packed Lily's lunch for school, drove her there like any other day, and smiled like nothing had changed. But as soon as I dropped her off, I parked the car in front of the riverfront and just sat there, watching tourists take pictures of the old cobblestone streets. They looked happy, normal. I wanted that so badly, to rewind to a time before the lies had teeth. By noon, I decided to confirm what I already feared. I called the airline directly. When the agent read the names on the booking, Daniel and Emily Rhodes, something inside me broke, but not in the way I expected. It wasn't dramatic, no screaming, just a quiet breaking, like glass cracking under steady pressure. I thanked her, hung up, and stared out the windshield. The world outside was still moving, cars honking, kids laughing, and yet it all felt muffled, like I was underwater, hearing life from a distance. When Daniel returned that night, he brought flowers. "For the trip," he said, handing them to me with that easy smile. I wanted to ask why. I wanted to throw the tickets in his face. But instead, I said, "They're beautiful," and placed them in a vase. Because when a woman's entire life has been built around keeping peace, her first instinct in chaos is still silence. That night, while he showered, I checked his phone, something I'd never done before. And there she was, Emily. The texts were careful, coded, but not careful enough. Mentions of our room, our escape, our new start. I felt the air leave my lungs. It wasn't just betrayal, it was replacement. He'd erased me before I even knew I was gone. So I did the only thing I could. I waited. I smiled. I pretended to believe his lies until he left for his business meeting, which I now knew was his getaway. I watched from the upstairs window as he loaded his suitcase into the trunk, adjusted his sunglasses, and drove off without looking back. I thought about how many times I'd watched him leave before, thinking he was heading towards something good for us. But this time, I finally understood he was heading away from the truth. When his car disappeared down the street, I felt an odd calm wash over me. The silence didn't hurt this time. It felt like a beginning, like the first deep breath after being underwater too long. After Daniel's car disappeared down Whitaker Street, I stood in the doorway for a long time, clutching the frame as if the wood could keep me steady. The house was silent, except for the slow tick of the wall clock and the hum of the refrigerator. Funny how a home can feel like it's holding its breath once the lies finally step outside. I walked to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and caught my reflection in the window. Same woman, same soft hair, pulled into a loose bun, but something in her eyes had changed. She looked awake. I took my laptop from the counter and opened our joint accounts again. The $100K transfer glared back at me like an open wound. Then I noticed smaller withdrawals. $1,200 here, $2,000 there, spread across the last 6 months. Each one tagged business reinvestment. He'd been planning this for a while, like slowly draining oxygen from a room, until no one noticed they couldn't breathe. My mind started piecing fragments together. The late night calls he'd taken on the porch, the sudden urgency to simplify our finances, the way he'd laughed off my questions about his new advisor. None of it was random. He hadn't just lied about a vacation. He'd been building a new life while dismantling ours. I printed every transaction, each piece of evidence, a heartbeat of truth on paper. I didn't know what I'd do with them yet, but I needed proof, something real in a world that had just shifted under my feet. As I stacked the pages, I realized my hands weren't shaking anymore. It was strange, that calm. The same kind of focus people describe when they've accepted something irreversible. Lily's laughter echoed from the backyard, where she was playing with the neighbor's dog. I stepped outside for a moment, watching her chase the ball across the grass. The evening air smelled of magnolia and salt from the river. For her sake, I had to stay composed. She was only 9, still believed her parents were a team. I wouldn't let his deceit become her definition of love. That night, after tucking her in, I sat at the kitchen table again. The lamp cast a warm halo across the documents, and I started writing a list. Every account in Daniel's name, every password I remembered, every contact he mentioned from his company. It felt methodical, almost therapeutic. Step 1, find the truth. Step 2, protect Lily. Step 3, survive the storm quietly. When Daniel called around midnight, I let it ring twice before answering. His voice came through bright, rehearsed. "Hey, just landed. Everything's perfect. Tell Lily I love her." I could hear laughter in the background. A woman's. He muted quickly, coughed, then said, "Bad connection. I'll call tomorrow." "Sure," I replied, steady. "Enjoy the trip." When I hung up, I realized something. I no longer felt small. The next morning, I went downtown to the local bank. The marble floors echoed under my sandals as I waited in line, clutching the file of printouts. When the teller asked how she could help, I said, "I need to open a private account." My voice didn't tremble. Within 30 minutes, I had one. My own account, my own key. It wasn't about the money. It was about claiming air to breathe. On my way home, I stopped by a small cafe I hadn't visited in years. A quiet place near Forsyth Park where the ceiling fans turned lazily and the barista remembered faces. I sat by the window, ordered black coffee, and opened my notebook. For the first time in months, I wrote without editing myself. He lied about everything, but I'm done waiting for truth. I'll find my own. Outside, the world moved like normal. Tourists taking carriage rides, college kids laughing under the oaks, and I realized life wasn't pausing for my heartbreak. It was inviting me forward. That evening, I called my older sister, Marianne, who lived 2 hours away in Macon. We hadn't talked much lately. Daniel had always said she interfered too much. When she picked up, her voice cracked with relief. "Sarah, I've been worried. You sound different." "I think I finally am," I said quietly. "I need a few days to think." "Come stay with me," she urged, but I declined. Not yet. I wanted to face the ruins before walking away from them. When I hung up, I walked through each room of our house. The framed photos, the souvenirs from trips that apparently never meant what I thought they did. The expensive gifts that suddenly looked like disguises. I could almost feel the echo of his lies in the walls. But I also saw something else, possibility. By midnight, I'd packed one suitcase, not out of panic but purpose. Just clothes for me and Lily, her favorite book, my journal, and the folder of documents. I left Daniel's things untouched. He'd already chosen what to carry with him. Before sleeping, I stepped onto the porch. The night was warm and still. Savannah's river breeze carried faint music from a downtown bar, and the streetlights painted the world in gold. For the first time, I didn't feel trapped by the stillness. I felt steady inside it. The betrayal still ached, but underneath it was a quiet strength I hadn't known existed. I whispered to myself, "This isn't the end, it's the reveal." And as the cicadas hummed in the trees, I realized I wasn't afraid of what came next. I was only afraid of wasting the lesson that came with the lie. By the next morning, the sunlight slanted through the blinds in thin golden lines across the floor. I woke before Lily did. Something about the quiet felt heavier, like the calm before a thunderstorm. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. 3 missed calls from Daniel, 1 text. "Daniel, please don't do anything stupid. I'll explain when I get back." It made me laugh, that small bitter kind of laugh that comes when you've run out of tears. Don't do anything stupid. He took our savings, lied to my face, and somehow still believed he could control how I reacted. I deleted the message without replying. Then I stood in front of the mirror, tying my hair up. I wasn't going to sit around and wait for explanations that would never be honest. I needed facts, evidence, and maybe closure. After dropping Lily off at school, I drove to Daniel's office. His company was in a sleek building downtown. Glass walls, marble floors. The kind of place that pretends everything inside it is perfect. The receptionist, a young woman with a too bright smile, recognized me immediately. "Oh, Mrs. Whitman, Daniel's away on business, right? Is everything okay? Just dropping off some papers." I lied easily, holding up a blank envelope. "I'll leave them on his desk if that's all right." She hesitated for a second, then nodded. "Sure, go ahead. You know the way." I walked down the hall, my heart thudding so loudly I could hear it in my ears. His office smelled faintly of his cologne, cedar, and something synthetic, like control. I closed the door behind me and began searching. It didn't take long. In the bottom drawer, beneath some old invoices, I found a brown leather folder labeled Dunmore Holdings. I didn't recognize the name. Inside were printed emails, signed agreements, and wire transfers, all linked to an offshore account. But what caught my breath was a contract with a name I knew too well, Melissa Hartley. I sat down slowly. Melissa had been Daniel's assistant for 2 years. Polite, quiet, the kind of woman who blended into the background. I'd seen her at our last holiday party, laughing too comfortably at his jokes. My stomach turned. The contract was for a new company, Hartley and Whitman Investments. Equal shares, equal authority, equal everything. He hadn't just stolen our money. He'd built a new life with her using it. For a moment, the air went out of the room. I pressed my palm against my chest, trying to breathe. Betrayal has a strange texture. It's not sharp, it's suffocating. Like standing in still water that's quietly rising. I photographed every document with my phone. Every signature, every timestamp. Then I replaced everything exactly as I'd found it, careful not to leave a trace. As I walked out, I thanked the receptionist again with a calmness that surprised even me. Inside, I was a storm. Back in my car, I sat in silence for a long time, watching the world move normally around me. People holding coffee cups, laughing, making plans. I envied their ordinary day. When I picked Lily up from school that afternoon, she asked if Daddy had called. I smiled and said, "He's busy with work, sweetheart." She nodded, satisfied, humming a tune she'd learned in music class. Her innocence was both my comfort and my burden. That night, after she went to bed, I printed the photos I'd taken from Daniel's office and spread them across the dining table. It looked like a crime scene, and maybe it was. The evidence of a man who'd committed emotional fraud. But beneath the anger was a clarity that steadied me. I wasn't going to let him destroy everything I'd built. I called Mary Ann. "Sarah, what's going on?" she asked. "I found something," I whispered. "He's not just cheating, he's laundering money with his assistant. I think he's planning to leave permanently." There was a pause. "You need to go to the police." "Not yet," I said firmly. "Not without proof that the money was ours. I'll find that first." She sighed, the kind of sigh only sisters can give. Equal parts worry and trust. "Just promise me you'll be careful." "I will," I said. But the truth was, I didn't know what careful even meant anymore. The next few days blurred into quiet investigation. I became someone else. Not the wife who baked for school fundraisers or watered the garden at dawn, but a quiet detective inside her own life. I went through our home computer, Daniel's drawers, old receipts, and found traces of his lies everywhere. New credit cards, unfamiliar hotel charges, recurring payments to a property management company in Hilton Head Island. The address was for a small villa. I stared at the listing online, oceanfront, secluded, bought under the name Dunmore Holdings. My hands trembled slightly as I clicked through the photos. One showed 2 wine glasses on the balcony table. Another showed a woman's scarf on the couch. Floral, soft pink. It was her, Melissa. I could have cried, but instead I laughed quietly, the sound dry and hollow. Sometimes, you reach a point where heartbreak becomes absurd. He had traded a decade of marriage for a beach view, and someone who called him sir at work. But anger wasn't enough. I needed to act. 2 nights later, I drove to Hilton Head after putting Lily to sleep at Mary Ann's house. The drive took 2 hours, the road lit only by my headlights and the occasional glow of distant towns. The villa was exactly as the photos showed, modern, sterile, expensive. I parked a few houses down and walked the rest of the way, the ocean wind pulling at my hair. Through the glass doors, I saw Daniel. He was sitting at a table, laughing with Melissa over dinner. My heart clenched, not from love, but from disbelief at how easily he lived inside his lies. I raised my phone, zoomed in, and took pictures. Proof. My hands didn't shake this time. I wasn't the same woman who cried on her kitchen floor. I was someone who decided to stop being a victim. As I turned to leave, my foot stepped on a dry leaf. The sound cracked the silence. Daniel looked up. For a second, Our eyes met through the glass. His face froze. I walked away without a word, back into the night, the ocean roaring faintly behind me. My phone buzzed 5 minutes later. "Daniel, where are you? What are you doing?" I ignored it. Then came another. "Daniel, you don't understand. It's not what it looks like." I laughed bitterly. "It's exactly what it looks like." I whispered to no one. By the time I returned to Savannah, the horizon was turning grey with dawn. I sat in my driveway for a long time, the car engine humming softly. I had all the proof I needed. Pictures, documents, records, enough to end his game. That morning, I met with a lawyer, a calm, sharp-eyed woman named Ms. Garrison. She listened quietly as I laid everything out, her pen moving across the notepad in neat strokes. When I finished, she looked up. "You've done more work than most investigators," she said. "But if he's transferring money under false pretenses, this isn't just infidelity. It's fraud, possibly embezzlement. So what do?" I asked. She folded her hands. "You gather a bit more. Don't confront him directly. Let him think you're still in the dark. We'll prepare a financial hold, but we need the bank logs tied to your joint account." I nodded, feeling the first spark of something close to control. Over the next week, I followed every instruction, quietly, patiently. I collected bank correspondence, email trails, even recorded a few of Daniel's phone calls, ones where he casually mentioned moving the rest before month end. Meanwhile, Daniel kept sending texts, fragments of guilt and manipulation. "You're overreacting. It's complicated. I was trying to protect you." Each message was a thread I no longer felt the need to pull. One evening, he showed up at the house unannounced. I was in the kitchen making tea when I heard the front door creak open. He looked tired, or maybe just caught. "Sarah," he said, forcing a soft smile. "We need to talk." I set the cup down, my voice calm. "Go ahead," he sighed. "I made mistakes. I just needed space to figure things out. The money, it's temporary. You'll get your share back. I promise." "Share," I repeated. "You mean the money I earned with you? The savings for Lily's future?" He hesitated, realizing the trap. "You don't understand business." I tilted my head slightly. "Maybe not, but I understand betrayal." He looked at me differently then. Not with guilt, but with fear. The kind of fear that comes when someone realizes their mask isn't working anymore. "I'm filing," I said quietly, "and I've already spoken to a lawyer. You'll hear from her soon." His jaw clenched. "You're making a mistake, Sarah." "No," I replied. "I'm correcting one." He left without another word, slamming the door behind him. The sound echoed through the house, but this time it didn't feel like loss. It felt like release. A few days later, Ms. Garrison called. "We've got him," she said. "The transfers are tied directly to your marital funds. You're entitled to restitution, and he may face investigation for misappropriation." I didn't cry. I didn't even smile. I just closed my eyes and exhaled slowly. That evening, I took Lily to Forsyth Park. She chased bubbles through the air, her laughter spilling into the wind. Watching her, I realized something simple but profound. I couldn't control what Daniel had done, but I could control what legacy his choices left behind. As the sun dipped below the moss-draped trees, I held Lily close and whispered, "We're going to be okay." And for the first time in months, I actually believed it. The morning the court summons was delivered, the air in Savannah felt different, sharp, heavy, almost electric. It wasn't just another humid day. It was the day the truth began to walk into the light. Ms. Garrison had called early. "He's been served," she said simply. "Already?" I whispered, clutching the phone. "Ready? He'll have 48 hours to respond." For a moment, I just stood there in the kitchen, staring out the window. The azaleas Daniel had planted last spring were in bloom, soft pink and white. I used to think they made the house look like home. Now they felt like ghost, pretty but hollow. I brewed myself a cup of coffee, sat at the dining table, and opened my laptop. I had avoided checking our joint email for weeks, but today I needed to. Inside was a string of messages, one from the bank, another from Daniel's company, and one from Melissa Hartley. The subject line read, "He's spiraling. Please don't ruin everything." I opened it slowly. "Sarah, I know you found out. I never meant for it to go this far. He said you'd agreed to the separation, that the money was just business restructuring. I realize now he's been lying to both of us. Please, don't go to the police. It'll destroy his career and yours." Her words were sharp and desperate, the tone of someone trying to save herself while pretending to care. For a second, I almost pitied her. Almost. Then I closed the laptop, because by now I understood something fundamental about Daniel. He didn't lie to hurt people. He lied because he believed he was smarter than everyone else. That was about to change. That afternoon, Ms. Garrison arranged a mediation meeting. Not a trial yet, but a preliminary step. "He'll come with his lawyer," she warned. "Keep your composure. He'll try to provoke emotion. Don't let him." I nodded. Calm on the outside, fire on the inside. The meeting was held in a small courthouse downtown, sunlight streaming through tall arched windows. I wore a cream blouse and a pearl necklace my mother had given me years ago, not as armor, but as memory. When Daniel walked in, I barely recognized him. His confidence had thinned. The tan from his island trips had faded, and his eyes darted around the room like a man cornered by his own shadow. He didn't look at me at first, only at the floor, then at his attorney, then finally, reluctantly, at me. "Sarah," he said, his voice soft, rehearsed. "You look well." I didn't reply. I let Ms. Garrison handle the opening. She laid the documents out one by one, printed bank records, wire transfers, photos, contracts, timestamps, every piece of his deceit laid bare. The silence in the room grew heavier with each page turned. When Daniel finally spoke, his voice cracked. "This is exaggerated," he said. "I never stole from her. We were business partners. The funds moved because you moved them." Ms. Garrison interrupted smoothly. "Without consent, from a joint marital account, into a company registered offshore under a false identity." His lawyer shifted uncomfortably, whispering something into his ear. Daniel's face tightened, but he forced a smile. "Sarah, we can fix this. You don't need to ruin me." I met his eyes for the first time and said quietly, "You already did that yourself." The mediator cleared his throat, breaking the tension. "Given the nature of the evidence, Mrs. Whitman, you're entitled to restitution and separation under misconduct grounds. We'll process the petition within 30 days. I nodded. Danielle's expression cracked, disbelief mixed with something uglier. When the session ended, he followed me out into the hallway. "You think you've won?" he said, voice low, eyes darting to make sure no one was listening. "I don't need to win," I replied. "I just needed to be free." He stepped closer, lowering his tone. "You'll regret this." For the first time in months, I smiled. Not bitterly, not nervously, but with genuine peace. Maybe, but at least my regrets are honest. And I walked away. That evening, I took Lily to my sister's again. I told her, "Mommy has some work to do." But really, I just needed air. I drove to the pier in downtown Savannah, the same one Daniel and I used to walk along when we were newly married. The water shimmered under the sunset, golden and calm. It was strange how the same place could feel so different once you see it without illusions. I sat there for a long time, thinking about the last 10 years. The house, the vacations, the promises, all built on a story I didn't write. But now, standing at the edge of the river, I realized something profound. I wasn't angry anymore. What I felt was light. Freedom doesn't arrive like a thunderclap. It comes quietly, in your ability to breathe without guilt, to smile without pretending, to plan your future without asking permission. That night, I booked a short trip to Miami. Not a family trip. Not a getaway with someone else's lies. Just me. A weekend to remember who I was before Daniel's world swallowed mine. The next morning, Ms. Garrison called again. "There's been a development," she said. "The court has frozen Daniel's accounts pending investigation. And, one more thing, the authorities found discrepancies in his business filings. It's likely the company will be audited." I leaned against the wall, closing my eyes. "So it's over." "Almost," she said. "You did the right thing, Sarah. You didn't just leave him. You exposed him." After the call, I packed Lily's school lunch, tied her hair into 2 little braids, and kissed her forehead. She smiled and said, "You're happier lately, Mommy." I laughed softly. Maybe I am, and I meant it. That night, Daniel called. I didn't answer at first, but curiosity won. His voice was rough, desperate. "They froze everything. Do you have any idea what you've done?" "Yes," I said calmly. "I protected myself." "You'll destroy me." "You already destroyed us," I said. "I'm just cleaning up the wreckage." There was silence. Then, unexpectedly, a soft laugh from his side, the kind that no longer had power over me. "You were always smarter than I gave you credit for." "I know," I replied, and hung up. For the first time, I slept through the night without waking in panic. No more midnight arguments in my head. No more wondering where he was. Just peace. Still, quiet peace. By the end of the week, I was standing barefoot on a Miami beach, watching the waves curl around my feet. I hadn't felt that kind of calm in years. The sky was streaked in pink and gold. The air warm. The sound of the ocean wrapping around me like forgiveness. I thought about the girl I used to be. The one who believed love could fix lies. The one who thought silence was strength. And I whispered to her, "You made it." But deep down, I knew this wasn't the end. It was just the turning of a page, the moment before the real transformation began. Because what I was about to do next would change everything. Not just for me, but for every woman who had ever been told she wasn't enough without someone else's approval. By the time I returned from Miami, Savannah was brimming with its familiar autumn charm. The oak trees dripping with Spanish moss. The cobblestone streets golden under the early morning sun. It smelled of coffee from the cafes lining Broughton Street, and somehow, that simple scent felt like home, in a way it hadn't for years. I carried my suitcase up the steps to my small apartment, the one I'd chosen after months of searching. It wasn't extravagant, but it was mine, and every square inch of it whispered freedom. The first thing I did was set up a small corner office space. My laptop, neatly stacked paperwork, and a journal sat on the wooden desk, sunlight spilling across it in a soft diagonal. I opened my journal and wrote 3 words at the top of the page: "No more lies." That became my mantra for the days ahead. Emails and notifications from Daniel and his family had slowed, but the court and bank were keeping me updated. Each day, I read the updates with growing confidence. Daniel's offshore accounts were frozen, and auditors were combing through his company's records. The realization hit me. The empire he'd built on manipulation and lies was unraveling, and I was no longer a part of it. On the 3rd morning after my return, I found a package waiting on my doorstep. A simple, unmarked envelope with my name in careful handwriting. Inside, there was a note from Lila, my former colleague at the hospital, who had quietly watched over me during my darkest days. "Sarah, I heard about everything. You were right to step away. Some of us have been there too. And your courage has given us strength. Let's meet. There's someone who wants to speak to you about starting a support network for nurses and caregivers facing the same challenges." I felt a flutter of something I hadn't experienced in a long time. Excitement. For years, I'd felt trapped, isolated, and undervalued. Now, the idea that my story could help others made me feel powerful in a way money or titles never could. That afternoon, I met Leela at a small cafe tucked into a quiet side street. She was smiling when she saw me, eyes bright. Across from her sat a middle-aged woman named Karen, former nurse, survivor of financial abuse within her own family. Karen shared stories of manipulation so similar to mine, it was uncanny. The more she spoke, the more I realized how many women suffered in silence, too afraid or ashamed to speak up. By the end of the meeting, we had a plan, a small support group for caregivers, navigating financial boundaries, emotional manipulation, and self-worth. Thursday evenings, my apartment, tea, and open, honest conversation. Just a circle of women empowering one another. We called it Boundaries for the Caregiver. And for the first time, I felt that my pain had purpose beyond survival. Meanwhile, Daniel's attempts at contact had slowed to desperate, sporadic messages, each more pathetic than the last. "Sarah, please reconsider." One email read, "We can fix everything if you just talk to me." I deleted it, unread. Another arrived, detailing supposed financial hardship and lost investments. I glanced at it, shook my head, and deleted it too. For weeks, the only thing I did with his messages was watch them pile into the trash folder. A visual reminder of my liberation. At work, everything shifted as well. My colleagues noticed the difference immediately. I walked taller, smiled without fear, and carried myself with a quiet authority. Dr. Martinez, who had always been an observer of my dedication, pulled me aside one evening. "You look different, Sarah," he said, handing me a cup of coffee from the break room table. "Not just more confident, freer. It's inspiring." "Thanks," I said, a soft smile brushing my lips. "It feels like I can finally breathe." And I could. 1 week later, an unexpected email arrived from the local news station in Savannah. A producer had read about my story in the hospital newsletter and reached out, asking if I'd be willing to share my experience on air. The financial abuse, the emotional manipulation, and how I had reclaimed my life. The first instinct was to decline. Media exposure was terrifying, but the second thought was stronger. If this could help just one woman break free, it's worth it. The interview was scheduled at sunrise. The natural light of Savannah's waterfront reflecting off the river. The camera crew was polite, the questions straightforward, and as I spoke, I realized something astonishing. I was no longer afraid. Every word I shared felt like reclaiming pieces of my life that had been stolen. After the segment aired, the response was immediate. Emails, calls, social media messages, women from across Georgia and beyond reached out. Stories poured in, some painfully familiar, others unique, but all carrying the same core theme: silence and invisibility in the face of abuse. That night, I opened a new journal and wrote, "I am not alone. No one should be." I felt an energy I hadn't known in years: purpose, connection, and the courage to continue speaking. Meanwhile, the legal aftermath continued. Daniel's company faced an official investigation. Reports of embezzlement and mismanagement began to surface publicly. Melissa posted frantically on social media, attempting to twist the narrative. "Sarah Whitman destroyed our family." Her caption read, under photos of empty offices and auctioned furniture. But the public reaction had shifted. Thanks to screenshots and factual responses I'd posted, her attempts at manipulation fell flat. Readers saw the truth through the clarity of evidence. I no longer tracked their downfall obsessively. It didn't matter. Their world collapsing was merely the natural consequence of their choices. My focus was entirely on the life I was building, my independence, my daughter's happiness, and the empowerment of other women. The support group grew steadily. Every Thursday, we gathered, sharing stories, resources, and encouragement. It was astonishing how quickly a network formed. Nurses, caregivers, even former patients who had witnessed exploitation quietly stepped forward to offer advice or financial literacy tools. By the third month, we had secured a small room at the community center for our meetings. a symbol of legitimacy and expansion. One evening, as I walked home from a meeting, I received a handwritten letter. The return address was unmistakable. Daniel's apartment. My pulse quickened, but I steeled myself. Inside, the handwriting was deliberate, smaller than before, careful. Sarah, I finally understand. Not just the money, not just the lies, but the person you are. I failed you in every conceivable way. I can't ask for forgiveness. I only hope that someday you see we were never a family, just a network of convenience and selfishness. You deserved better. You always did. If nothing else, know this. I see you. I finally see you. I read it twice, then set it aside. I didn't feel anger or guilt or a flicker of regret. I felt closure. For the first time in over a decade, I slept without the shadow of his presence looming over me. Months later, a package arrived from the estate of Nancy Hartley, Daniel's mother, whose passing had gone largely unnoticed after their financial collapse. The contents were unexpected. A collection of gold jewelry, carefully appraised at over $15,000. The irony wasn't lost on me. Pieces purchased with my money, worn at family gatherings, I was deliberately excluded from, now in my hands. Instead of keeping it, I drove straight to the women's shelter in downtown Savannah. The director, Patricia, looked at the cashier's check and blinked. "This is incredibly generous," she said, voice tight with emotion. "Would you like to name the fund?" I smiled softly. "Call it the Family Fund," I said, "for women finding their real families after losing fake ones." Patricia nodded knowingly, the recognition in her eyes matching the countless stories I had shared with her that day. Family doesn't require payment for admission. 2 years had passed since the events that had shaken my life to its core. Savannah's streets were no longer a reminder of betrayal, but of rebirth. I volunteered for the sunrise shift at the hospital, marking the anniversary with work that mattered. Work where my efforts were recognized, where my worth was measured in skill and compassion, not bank statements. I parked my car, coffee in hand, classical music playing softly through the speakers, and walked inside. The automatic doors opened with their familiar whoosh, welcoming me as if the building itself acknowledged the person I had become. By the time I returned from Miami, Savannah was brimming with its familiar autumn charm. The oak trees dripping with Spanish moss. The cobblestone streets golden under the early morning sun. It smelled of coffee from the cafes lining Broughton Street, and somehow, that simple scent felt like home, in a way it hadn't for years. I carried my suitcase up the steps to my small apartment, the one I'd chosen after months of searching. It wasn't extravagant, but it was mine, and every square inch of it whispered freedom. The first thing I did was set up a small corner office space. My laptop, neatly stacked paperwork, and a journal sat on the wooden desk, sunlight spilling across it in a soft diagonal. I opened my journal and wrote 3 words at the top of the page: "No more lies." That became my mantra for the days ahead. Emails and notifications from Daniel and his family had slowed, but the court and bank were keeping me updated. Each day, I read the updates with growing confidence. Daniel's offshore accounts were frozen, and auditors were combing through his company's records. The realization hit me. The empire he'd built on manipulation and lies was unraveling, and I was no longer a part of it. On the 3rd morning after my return, I found a package waiting on my doorstep. A simple, unmarked envelope with my name in careful handwriting. Inside, there was a note from Lila, my former colleague at the hospital, who had quietly watched over me during my darkest days. "Sarah, I heard about everything. You were right to step away. Some of us have been there too. And your courage has given us strength. Let's meet. There's someone who wants to speak to you about starting a support network for nurses and caregivers facing the same challenges." I felt a flutter of something I hadn't experienced in a long time. Excitement. For years, I'd felt trapped, isolated, and undervalued. Now, The idea that my story could help others made me feel powerful in a way money or titles never could. That afternoon, I met Leela at a small cafe tucked into a quiet side street. She was smiling when she saw me, eyes bright. Across from her sat a middle-aged woman named Karen, former nurse, survivor of financial abuse within her own family. Karen shared stories of manipulation so similar to mine, it was uncanny. The more she spoke, the more I realized how many women suffered in silence, too afraid or ashamed to speak up. By the end of the meeting, we had a plan, a small support group for caregivers, navigating financial boundaries, emotional manipulation, and self-worth. Thursday evenings, my apartment, tea, and open, honest conversation. Just a circle of women empowering one another. We called it Boundaries for the Caregiver. And for the first time, I felt that my pain had purpose beyond survival. Meanwhile, Daniel's attempts at contact had slowed to desperate, sporadic messages, each more pathetic than the last. "Sarah, please reconsider." One email read, "We can fix everything if you just talk to me." I deleted it, unread. Another arrived, detailing supposed financial hardship and lost investments. I glanced at it, shook my head, and deleted it too. For weeks, the only thing I did with his messages was watch them pile into the trash folder, a visual reminder of my liberation. At work, everything shifted as well. My colleagues noticed the difference immediately. I walked taller, smiled without fear, and carried myself with a quiet authority. Dr. Martinez, who had always been an observer of my dedication, pulled me aside one evening. "You look different, Sarah," he said, handing me a cup of coffee from the break room table. "Not just more confident, freer. It's inspiring." "Thanks," I said, a soft smile brushing my lips. "It feels like I can finally breathe." And I could. 1 week later, an unexpected email arrived from the local news station in Savannah. A producer had read about my story in the hospital newsletter and reached out, asking if I'd be willing to share my experience on air. The financial abuse, the emotional manipulation, and how I had reclaimed my life. The first instinct was to decline. Media exposure was terrifying, but the second thought was stronger. If this could help just one woman break free, it's worth it. The interview was scheduled at sunrise. The natural light of Savannah's waterfront reflecting off the river. The camera crew was polite, the questions straightforward, and as I spoke, I realized something astonishing. I was no longer afraid. Every word I shared felt like reclaiming pieces of my life that had been stolen. After the segment aired, the response was immediate. Emails, calls, social media messages, women from across Georgia and beyond reached out. Stories poured in, some painfully familiar, others unique, but all carrying the same core theme: silence and invisibility in the face of abuse. That night, I opened a new journal and wrote, "I am not alone. No one should be." I felt an energy I hadn't known in years: purpose, connection, and the courage to continue speaking. Meanwhile, the legal aftermath continued. Daniel's company faced an official investigation. Reports of embezzlement and mismanagement began to surface publicly. Melissa posted frantically on social media, attempting to twist the narrative. "Sarah Whitman destroyed our family." Her caption read, under photos of empty offices and auctioned furniture. But the public reaction had shifted. Thanks to screenshots and factual responses I'd posted, her attempts at manipulation fell flat. Readers saw the truth through the clarity of evidence. I no longer tracked their downfall obsessively. It didn't matter. Their world collapsing was merely the natural consequence of their choices. My focus was entirely on the life I was building, my independence, my daughter's happiness, and the empowerment of other women. The support group grew steadily. Every Thursday, we gathered, sharing stories, resources, and encouragement. It was astonishing how quickly a network formed. Nurses, caregivers, even former patients who had witnessed exploitation, quietly stepped forward to offer advice or financial literacy tools. By the third month, we had secured a small room at the community center for our meetings, a symbol of legitimacy and expansion. One evening, as I walked home from a meeting, I received a handwritten letter. The return address was unmistakable. Daniel's apartment. My pulse quickened, but I steeled myself. Inside, the handwriting was deliberate, smaller than before, careful. Sarah, I finally understand. Not just the money, not just the lies, but the person you are. I failed you in every conceivable way. I can't ask for forgiveness. I only hope that someday you see we were never a family, just a network of convenience and selfishness. You deserved better. You always did. If nothing else, know this. I see you. I finally see you. I read it twice, then set it aside. I didn't feel anger or guilt or a flicker of regret. I felt closure. For the first time in over a decade, I slept without the shadow of his presence looming over me. Months later, a package arrived from the estate of Nancy Hartley, Daniel's mother, whose passing had gone largely unnoticed after their financial collapse. The contents were unexpected. A collection of gold jewelry, carefully appraised at over $15,000. The irony wasn't lost on me. Pieces purchased with my money, worn at family gatherings, I was deliberately excluded from, now in my hands. Instead of keeping it, I drove straight to the women's shelter in downtown Savannah. The director, Patricia, looked at the cashier's check and blinked. "This is incredibly generous," she said, voice tight with emotion. "Would you like to name the fund?" I smiled softly. "Call it the Family Fund," I said, "for women finding their real families after losing fake ones." Patricia nodded knowingly, the recognition in her eyes matching the countless stories I had shared with her that day. Family doesn't require payment for admission. 2 years had passed since the events that had shaken my life to its core. Savannah's streets were no longer a reminder of betrayal, but of rebirth. I volunteered for the sunrise shift at the hospital, marking the anniversary with work that mattered. Work where my efforts were recognized, where my worth was measured in skill and compassion, not bank statements. I parked my car, coffee in hand, classical music playing softly through the speakers, and walked inside. The automatic doors opened with their familiar whoosh, welcoming me as if the building itself acknowledged the person I had become. I passed colleagues who smiled warmly, patients who trusted me implicitly, and for a fleeting moment, I realized this was my real family. My phone stayed silent. No urgent messages. No desperate pleas. Just quiet. Freedom in its purest form had arrived. And as I stepped into the chaos of the emergency department, I carried something far more valuable than money, love, or approval. I carried peace, clarity, and the undeniable truth that I had reclaimed my life. The morning sun filtered softly through my apartment blinds, casting long golden streaks across the hardwood floor. I made coffee, inhaling the aroma like it was a promise of something better. Savannah was waking up around me, joggers moving down the cobblestone streets, the faint hum of streetcars, and the occasional clang of cafe dishes being set out. Everything felt ordinary. Yet every moment carried a quiet magic I hadn't noticed before. Ordinary had become extraordinary simply because I had survived. The apartment was mine, every corner echoing with my choices, my independence, my voice finally untethered. I sat at the small kitchen table, sipping coffee and opening my laptop to check emails for the hospital's administrative updates. Not a single message from Daniel or his family had reached me overnight. It felt surreal, like the weight of years had finally lifted. I reviewed my calendar and noticed Thursday night was approaching, the night of the next support group meeting. Lila had suggested we focus on budgeting and financial literacy for caregivers who often sacrifice their own security for the well-being of others. I smiled to myself, thinking about the transformation I'd witnessed in the group members over the past few months. Women who had walked in with tentative voices, hesitant glances, and nervous energy now spoke with clarity, confidence, and the boldness to claim their independence. They were reclaiming their lives, one boundary at a time, and I had been part of igniting that spark. The day at work passed in its usual rush, stabilizing patients, comforting families, and navigating emergencies that demanded my full attention. But something had shifted. I moved with an energy I hadn't known in years. Calm, canted, and unafraid. My colleagues noticed. Beth, who had once whispered sympathetic words about my struggles, now smiled knowingly each time I passed. Even Dr. Martinez commented, during a quiet moment in the break room, "Sarah, it's remarkable watching you flourish. Your confidence, it inspires everyone around you." I accepted the compliment with a simple nod and a quiet smile. It wasn't about recognition. It was about the freedom to be myself, unapologetically. That evening, as the sun dipped low, I prepared my apartment for the support group. Cups of tea steamed gently on the counter, cushions were arranged in a circle, and the small lamp in the corner cast a warm, inviting glow. One by one, women arrived, carrying stories, notebooks, and the nervous energy of people ready to confront painful truths. There was Lila, smiling softly, and Karen, who had been instrumental in shaping our discussion topics. New faces trickled in, nurses I'd never met, caregivers from clinics across Savannah, and even a few volunteers from the women's shelter. The room buzzed with anticipation. Once everyone settled, I took a deep breath and began to speak. I shared my story in detail, my marriage to Daniel, the financial manipulation, the subtle gaslighting, and the way I'd finally found the courage to step away. I watched as faces shifted, eyes glistened, and nods of recognition rippled through the room. Some women held back tears, others sat in silent contemplation, but the energy was palpable. The moment my voice conveyed, not just survival, but empowerment, the room transformed. We were no longer victims. We were architects of our futures. Discussion followed. Each woman shared experiences, fears, and the strategies they had used, or wished they had used, to protect themselves. Some admitted to giving too much, afraid to ask for help. Others revealed financial mistakes they had made under pressure from family or partners. I guided the conversation gently, ensuring no one felt judged, only supported. As we delved into practical advice, budgeting tips, ways to open private accounts, and asserting boundaries without guilt, I felt an extraordinary sense of purpose. This was more than a group. It was a sanctuary. By the end of the evening, the room hummed with a quiet triumph. Women exchanged numbers, promising to check in and support one another. Lila and Karen lingered, helping me clear the teacups and fold chairs. "You've created something special here," Karen said softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "This is going to save so many people." I nodded, a lump forming in my throat. "We're saving ourselves too," I whispered. That night, after everyone left, I sat alone in my apartment, reflecting. I realized how far I'd come, not just in reclaiming financial autonomy, but in establishing emotional strength, boundaries, and a network of women who understood my journey. I had stopped being a pawn in someone else's game. For the first time in years, I felt whole. The next week brought a new challenge, an unexpected encounter with Daniel himself. I was walking along the riverfront, enjoying the crisp air and the soft rustle of fallen leaves, when I noticed a familiar figure leaning against a lamppost. His expression was a mixture of fatigue and apprehension, the kind of vulnerability I had rarely seen in him before. He called out my name, hesitating as I approached. "Sarah, can we talk?" His voice was softer than I remembered, almost human. I stopped, keeping a safe distance. "There's nothing left to talk about," I said evenly. "Everything you needed to know, you've already learned." he sighed, glancing at the river that glimmered under the moonlight. I need you to understand. I never realized what I was doing. The lies, the control. I see it now. I failed you in every way. I'm sorry. I studied him, weighing the sincerity in his voice. And yet, I knew that forgiveness didn't mean going back. I could acknowledge his recognition of wrongdoing without reopening a chapter I had closed. I appreciate the honesty, I said, but some things can't be undone. What's done is done. He nodded slowly, and for a fleeting moment, I almost felt pity. But then I reminded myself why I'd walked away. The manipulation, the financial abuse, the years of invisible suffering. Pity couldn't undo that. I turned and walked away, letting the riverfront wind carry my steps. A quiet affirmation of independence. Back in my apartment, I began planning my next steps. The support group had inspired me to create a resource guide for caregivers facing financial and emotional manipulation. A combination of advice, personal stories, and actionable steps. I drafted outlines, wrote articles, and created worksheets, each page a testament to survival, strength, and practical empowerment. I shared the drafts with Lila and Karen, whose feedback refined the guide into something accessible, honest, and profoundly useful. Within weeks, the guide was ready for distribution. Hospitals, shelters, and clinics across Savannah received copies. Emails poured in from nurses and caregivers, some expressing relief, others gratitude. A few even sent donations to support the group. I realized that my story, my struggle, and my recovery had the power to create ripple effects far beyond my immediate circle. One afternoon, as I returned home from the hospital, I received an unexpected visitor. A young woman named Emily, introduced by Patricia at the shelter, stood hesitantly at my door. She clutched a folder of notes and looked at me nervously. "Hi, I heard about your group," she said softly. I think I need help." I invited her in, gesturing toward the living room cushions. As she began sharing her story, I felt a surge of empathy and determination. Each tear she shed, each quiet admission, reminded me of my own journey. The fear, the confusion, and ultimately, the courage to claim my life. By the time she left, I had not only offered guidance, but it also reinforced my own resolve to continue using my experience to help others navigate similar paths. That night, I sat by the window, overlooking the softly lit streets of Savannah. The city felt alive in a way that matched my internal state, vibrant, resilient, and unafraid. For the first time in years, I felt completely aligned with who I was meant to be. No longer a victim of manipulation, no longer confined by fear or obligation, and no longer defined by someone else's greed. I was free, and with freedom came responsibility. A responsibility to myself and to the women who would follow this path after me. The horizon was painted in hues of lavender and gold, a gentle promise of new beginnings. I realized that life would always bring challenges, but the difference now was that I had learned to navigate them with strength, clarity, and unwavering self-respect. And in that realization, I found a deep, abiding peace. The morning sun in Savannah broke over the horizon like a gentle promise, spilling golden light across the cobblestone streets and the Spanish moss-draped oaks. Outside my apartment window, I sat at the small kitchen table, a steaming cup of tea in my hands, and allowed myself to fully inhale the calm that had become my new normal. For the first time in years, there were no ringing phones with desperate demands, no messages from people who considered my hard-earned money their entitlement, no lingering anxieties about bills that weren't mine to worry about. Just the soft hum of city life outside and the warm, quiet space that I had claimed for myself. I opened the folder that had been on my mind for weeks, the support guide I had been developing for women trapped in financial and emotional abuse. Its pages were filled with advice, strategies, and resources. But more than that, they contained stories, mine, and those I had collected from anonymous women who had bravely shared their experiences. I had written in detail about the subtle ways abuse could infiltrate one's life, the small manipulations, the pressure to help out just this once, the guilt disguised as family obligation. I had also laid out the steps I had taken to reclaim my independence, from opening my own bank account to setting boundaries and building my community. Holding the finished guide in my hands, I felt a surge of purpose. This wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about creating a roadmap for others to follow. Later that week, Emily returned to my apartment, carrying a notebook brimming with questions. She had come seeking guidance, hesitant but determined. The same way I had approached Patricia weeks earlier. I could see the fear and uncertainty etched in her features. The fear of judgment, the fear of making the wrong choice. But beneath it all, the spark of determination was unmistakable. Over tea, I walked her through financial independence strategies, the importance of saying no, and ways to recognize manipulation before it escalated. I watched her shoulders relax, her voice grow stronger with each question answered. In that moment, I realized that freedom was no longer just about my own life. It was about passing on the knowledge and strength I had gained, lighting the way for others, still trapped in shadows. Work at the hospital had become a sanctuary, rather than a battlefield. Patients' cries no longer echoed like chains in my mind, and the constant anxiety of managing someone else's finances had vanished. I moved through the emergency department with a calm, methodical efficiency, assisting families, comforting patients, and mentoring younger nurses. Beth noticed the change immediately. "You seem lighter," she said during a brief lull, a knowing look in her eyes. "Like the old Sarah, but better." I smiled, acknowledging her observation silently. Better. Yes, that was exactly it. Better, because I had reclaimed myself. Then came an invitation that both surprised and humbled me. The Savannah Women's Health Initiative asked me to speak at a citywide event focused on caregiver wellness. They wanted me to share my story, my guide, and the principles of financial and emotional independence. At first, hesitation gripped me. Years of silence and isolation had conditioned me to shrink, to avoid visibilities. But as I thought of Emily, Lila, and every woman in our informal support circle, I realized that speaking out wasn't about my comfort. It was about empowering those who couldn't yet see a path forward. The night of the event, the auditorium buzzed with anticipation. Nurses, caregivers, social workers, and advocates filled every seat, the air thick with expectation and empathy. I walked to the podium, heart steady, and began to speak. I recounted my journey, the manipulation, the gaslighting, the years of being undervalued, despite giving everything I had. I spoke candidly about opening my own account, reclaiming my finances, and stepping away from a relationship that had drained me emotionally and financially. The room was silent, hanging on every word. I emphasized that freedom wasn't a single, dramatic act, but a series of deliberate choices. Choosing boundaries, choosing yourself, choosing life on your own terms. Afterward, dozens approached me, sharing their stories and thanking me for the courage to speak openly. Some admitted they were trapped in relationships where money, love, or emotional manipulation were intertwined. Others simply needed reassurance that leaving was not a betrayal, but an act of survival. I listened, offered guidance, and witnessed the immediate effect of validation. Fear melted into resolve, uncertainty into empowerment. With each conversation, I felt the same hope that had carried me through my darkest days reflected back at me, and a deep sense of purpose settled in my chest. The days that followed were filled with quiet victories. Emily returned with 2 new women in tow, each carrying the same mix of fear and determination that I had once felt. We gathered in my living room, cushions forming a circle, and began a new session. I guided them through the practical steps I had taken, creating a budget that prioritized self-sufficiency, learning to recognize subtle manipulation, and building a community of support. I watched their confidence grow as they shared experiences, offered each other advice, and realized that independence was within reach. The ripple effect of what had begun as my personal journey was becoming tangible, one small empowerment at a time. Then, unexpectedly, a certified letter arrived from Henry. My fingers hesitated over the envelope. Part of me expected another plea, another attempt to stir guilt or reopen the past. But when I opened it, the words were neutral, factual, an acknowledgement of responsibility, a confirmation that he was learning to manage his finances independently, and no attempt at reconciliation. I felt nothing but calm. Closure had already been found, not in his words, but in the life I had built. As winter gave way to spring, I embraced new hobbies I had long abandoned. Photography allowed me to capture Savannah's beauty, the light reflecting off the river at dawn, the intricate patterns of the moss-draped oaks, the laughter of children playing along the squares. Hiking gave me the freedom to explore the city's hidden trails, letting the physical challenge remind me of the mental strength I had cultivated. Cooking became an act of self-care, each meal a small celebration of independence and creativity. Small victories accumulated, a promotion at the hospital, growth of the support group, the success of my guide, and quiet moments of reflection on my balcony overlooking the city. By midsummer, the support group had grown into a network spanning Savannah, connecting caregivers, nurses, and women in shelters. What had begun as a handful of participants in my apartment was now a movement. I traveled to workshops and panels, returning home to my sanctuary with renewed energy. The once unimaginable reality of living for myself, without manipulation, without fear, without obligation to those who had taken advantage of me, was now ordinary, and in that ordinariness, I discovered profound joy. One evening, a package arrived at my door. Inside was a photograph album from Patricia at the women's shelter, filled with images of smiling women whose lives had been changed by the family fund I had established. The photos were candid, women learning to budget, attending workshops, taking classes, reclaiming hobbies, and building communities. A note accompanied the album: "Your actions change lives. Thank you for believing in all of us." I held the album close, tears streaming down my face, not tears of sadness, but of gratitude. I had been a victim once, but now I was a source of strength. That night, before bed, I sent Emily a simple message. Remember, freedom isn't just leaving, it's building. Keep going. I set the phone aside, the apartment quiet except for the soft hum of Savannah's nightlife below. I lay back on the couch, breathing deeply, feeling grounded and canted. I had rebuilt my life on my own terms, surrounded by people who valued me, and disconnected from those who had once drained me. The air was clear, the city welcoming, and for the first time, I felt the profound peace of being fully, unapologetically myself. Weeks later, a note arrived from a surprising source, Henry again. But this time, there was no anger, no guilt, no manipulation. His handwriting was careful, deliberate, acknowledging the past wrongs, admitting that he had learned the hard way the cost of selfishness, and stating that he wished me well. I read it once, carefully, then set it aside. There was no anger, no bitterness, only clarity that the past was firmly behind me. My life had become defined not by others' actions, but by my own choices. Autumn arrived in Savannah with a soft golden haze. I began teaching workshops, hosting support circles in my apartment, and even coordinating citywide initiatives to educate women about financial abuse. Each week brought new faces, new stories, new victories. I watched women leave the circles lighter, more confident, empowered with the knowledge and courage I had once struggled to find. The ripple effect was undeniable. My story, once a private struggle, had transformed into a beacon for others. That Thanksgiving, for the first time in years, I didn't receive an invitation from Henry's family. I didn't need one. I spent the day at the hospital, surrounded by colleagues and patients who had become my real family. We shared laughter, food, and gratitude, not out of obligation, but because we genuinely valued one another. I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. From fear and manipulation to independence, from silence to voice, from isolation to community, Savannah had been witness to my transformation, its streets and skies marking each step along the path of my rebirth. As night fell, I sat on my balcony with a cup of tea, the city lights twinkling like stars mirrored on earth. I thought of Emily, the women at the shelter, and every person who had allowed me to reclaim my voice. Freedom, I realized, was not a destination. It was a series of choices, moments of courage, and acts of self-respect that accumulated over time. The journey had been long, the lessons hard-earned, but the reward was profound. A life defined by my own terms, my own boundaries, and my own voice. I set my cup down, breathing in the cool Savannah air. I was independent. I was respected. I was empowered. And I was finally completely free.